Hello? Oh,
Hello.
okay. Very Good morning. How is everyone doing? Good. A nice day of presentation and no class, right? Yes, exactly. I want to introduce for you Joanna Catania, okay. She is a Grand Valley State University. She got a criminal justice degree in 1999 and then a master's degree in public relations. She is on, now this is really fascinating here. She's on the negotiation team with the Holland Department of Public Safety, so she's a police officer. And she's a road patrol officer. She's been on the force for 13 years. And more importantly, like CSI, criminal, those investigative shows, she is an evidence technician, so hopefully someone will have some really exciting questions about that. So give Joanna a very warm GRCC welcome.
Good morning, everybody. It's morning for me. I worked last night. How many of you guys stayed up all night? Oh, why? Why? Just to torture yourself? Okay. When you get my age, you eventually like sleep. I promise you. Okay. I titled this Law Enforcement, Guts and Glory, or Pen and Paper. I'm going to tell you, it's pen and paper. Nobody calls to say they love the job you did. And, well, it takes a lot of guts. I'll give it that one. But people barely call you to say, hey, we loved your job. Usually people say, what do you think people say? Thanks for the ticket? No, right? Okay. As she was saying, I work for the Holland Department of Public Safety, been there for 13 years. Evidence technician, which means I respond to the crime scenes. I process the crime scenes, collect evidence. But I also work road patrol, so it means I'm also responding to regular calls as well. As a CNT member, crisis negotiation team member, I'm also trying to talk the guy down. Come on out, turn yourself in. So that's what that team is, okay? Another little interesting fact about me, I also am an MEI. Anybody heard of an MEI? I decided that full-time employment is not enough for me. I took part-time employment as a medical examiner investigator. So I go to death scenes, and I confirm for forensic pathologists why somebody died, how they died, and it looks natural, or it doesn't look natural. So that's my part-time job. Went to Grand Valley State University, again, criminal justice and master's of public administration. So that's a brief about me. If you have any questions about any of that stuff, feel free to ask, okay? Continual theme in law enforcement will always be report writing, report writing, report writing. If you make an arrest, that is just the start of the process. It is not the end of the process. When you start in this field, you're thinking that's, okay, we took the guy to jail, great. That's the start of your whole world right there. It's the start of your mess. You're gonna have to explain everything you did, why you did it, how you did it. And in the end, report writing ends up being one of these things where you're creating the environment for people who were not there. So if I tell you I went to a domestic violence call last night, what does that mean to you? Maybe people were fighting, maybe people lived together, maybe somebody went to jail, but that's not gonna be enough. Okay, there's elements of crimes. Is anybody here in criminal justice? How far are we along here? Just started? Just started? Okay. Yeah, you're gonna learn that just saying, oh, hey, I went to an arson call, or I went to, those are really vague terms. We need to be more specific and explain. Basically, you're going to paint a picture with the words for everybody else who was not there, because prosecutors aren't going to your crime scenes. They're not going to your crime scenes for the most part and saying, like you see in some of the CSI shows, or what's the other one, Special Victims Unit. Everybody see those shows where the prosecutor's always on the scene asking questions? It doesn't happen typically. Maybe it happens in New York, I don't know. But in Holland, it doesn't happen. And I would dare say Grand Rapids, it doesn't happen either. So I just wanted to point out a couple points that I feel are important about report writing or writing in general. You'll see that some of these themes will be evident in a lot of your writing courses, but there's just a little bit different twist, maybe for report writing for law enforcement, or report writing for business, or report writing for maybe grant writing. And I throw that one out there because even in law enforcement we do grant writing as well, because Not all of our money comes from federal government sources or tax sources, correct? Everybody heard of grant writing? Where there's grants out there to apply for equipment. So, all right, so these 7 points, we're gonna kinda go through one at a time. Just real brief. You have to target your audience. Who is your audience? In law enforcement, you have multiple people that you're directing your information at. A jury, your judges, prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys. And I threw those last two in there kind of as a thought too. Your media and as citizens through FOIA. FOIA is Freedom of Information Act. Any police report you ever write is accessible by other citizens. They're public record. So if people want to find out or read about a report I did last night, they can request a copy of it. And they'll get to read a copy of it. So why it's important to know who your audience is you need to understand that these are people you are directing your report at. So they also have to understand. And so if you can see here, your education level is going to be varying, correct? You could have somebody, somebody who's a citizen who has not completed high school, or even a jury member, correct? That's not a qualification to being on a jury, versus judges and prosecutors and defense attorneys. And I will put this as a little side note just to kind of pick on defense attorneys. Anybody here want to go and become an attorney? Okay, so nobody's going to the dark side, becoming a defense attorney. Okay, so I always tease defense attorneys. They always ask me questions whenever they ask. I always wonder if they ever went to college, but that's because they ask really special questions and really specific questions. They want to know the nitty gritty, so they put them in very basic terms sometimes. Another purpose, let's talk about purpose. What's your purpose to writing and report writing? When you go to a call, say you don't make an arrest, or even if you do make an arrest, you want your charges to be authorized by the prosecutor. You don't want to be making a false arrest or what looks like a false arrest because you didn't have enough information in your report. So if you leave out critical pieces of information, you may lose your case or it doesn't get authorized because you didn't put certain pieces of information, certain elements of the crime. So you can get a conviction in court. And this is another one of my personal favorite, to exonerate someone. So you accuse your friend here of assaulting you or destroying your property, and I have the information and the ability to write a report saying, no, she didn't do it. So my job is not to just be one-sided and say, this person did do something. It's also to say, this person did not do that. You want to organize your thoughts, all right? Put the cart before the horse. Everybody hear that saying before? So if you write your report and you're saying, I arrested so-and-so. Okay. There was a complaint of a noise complaint. Okay. That might be the start of it. Somebody called 911 to make a noise complaint, or I was doing patrol and I was a block away and I could hear people screaming. You have to organize your thoughts. You guys are all in writing classes, right? You guys have professors tell you that this is out of order. This maybe needs to move here and that. It's the same thing with report writing. You're gonna have to put things in order. Developing points and clarifying. So I talked about elements of a crime. These are points that you might be listing, and you want to clarify what happened. I like to use domestic violence as a good example because there's lots of definitions and laws that change over the years, but definitions of relationship. It used to be in the definition of relationship for domestic violence relationships or domestic relationships, there wasn't included dating relationship. So if you were dating but you didn't live together and you got into a physical altercation, fight, you couldn't be charged with domestic assault. Years passed by and they added dating relationship in there. And so I like to use this one as an example. I tease the guys at work that we have what's called a tent city in parts of Holland that have popped up. It's where some homeless people have just started to build little tent cities on the back area of a railroad, CSX, their property. So they're illegally there. But what has caused us the problem is lots of times these guys are drinking and are drunk, And then they call us because they get into a fight. And then it just has become a problem because there's no way to monitor because they're deep in the woods somewhere and they're fighting back there, and then they call us because they were beating on each other. So it's a drunken brawl. And I started to tease guys, and I said, we should start making domestic violence arrests. They live in tents together. A tent is defined as a domicile. They live together. I'm like, it's domestic. Like, we can cure that problem right there. Take them to jail. And then they can't return. Because what's one of the conditions for domestic violence? A bond condition? You can't return back to the environment where the victim lives. I'm like, we could cure that real quick. We haven't done that, but it's an option. So this is something to think about when you know your definitions, you know your elements of your crimes. I don't know if the prosecutor would go for it, but I would try it sometimes. So other thing is you're going to explain who did what. This point I find just to be extremely important just because about developing points and clarifying, because I go to calls all the time and there's 3 or 4 people involved, and people go to tell me a story and they say, he did this and she did that and she did this and she did that and I have to stop them and ask them how many people are involved and can you give me a name? Can you tell me that Sue did this and then John did that? Because I can't follow the story, right? If I told you at my house last night, a guy was there and he said this to another guy who then said this to another guy, it gets confusing. So your report it needs to reflect that same kind of clarity. On another note, if you say Mr. Hansen did this and Mr. Hansen did that and Mr. Hansen, you can start using he and she in some of those sentences as long as you're not talking about 2 or 3 people at the same time, correct? Make sure that your descriptions are specific and meaningful. The reason why I say that is, as a new officer, I found that I'm even guilty of it. I would say the person was injured. That doesn't say anything. They were bleeding. They had a bruise. They had a red mark. They were holding their arm, grasping it tightly to their body. That would be more a description of the injury, correct, than saying they were injured. So be specific. And then upset or crying versus crying. The person was upset. How can you tell they're upset? You know, I can tell somebody looks bored or they look tired, but how could I tell they were tired? Well, they were nodding off. Or I got a blank stare. They had tears running down their face. They were panicking and screaming and yelling and running around, panicked. Right? So be more descriptive. So you want your words to mean something. Transitions. Since you're not writing a novel, your transitional statements are different for report writing. The best thing for law enforcement, and APA style does this a lot too, and that's basically your route when you're in criminal justice is you're writing APA style. Does anybody have their APA manuals? You got it memorized? I know before I graduated for my master's degree, I had to go and buy another APA manual because they change things. They change things every year, I think, so you have to buy a new manual. But headers are the best way to transition in report writing for law enforcement, especially. You start out with your first header would be information. For a medical examiner, my first heading is circumstances. 64-year-old white male found deceased by his neighbor, laying on the ground in the bathroom, laying on the floor in the bathroom, something of that nature. So I'm introducing everybody to what this report's going to be about. Law enforcement might say, the following is a report of a suicide attempt, and maybe a quick disposition. The person went to the hospital, or an overdose by pills or something of that nature. So it helps people with train of thought. But one of the other important parts about this is helpful when you go to court, because you're on the stand and you're nervous. And if you're new and you're nervous, it's gonna be worse. But also if a defense attorney starts asking you questions about something that you have no idea why they're going down that train of thought, which it happens, that your brain's thinking, your brain's running, and then so you're now distracted, and then they ask you a detail that you can't remember. So you ask them, can I refer back to my report? So while you're nervous and your brain's running, you could look at your headers. Because if you're looking for someone's chemical test rights or results, say it's an OWI, we all know what OWI is, drunk driving. So it's a drunk driving report. You want to be able to go right to that heading, page 5. You find it versus think about if it's one big paragraph or several even small paragraphs, how hard it would be to find that information. Be concise. I talked to one of our typists. We actually dictate our reports. So we actually have to hold a recorder and walk around and talk into it. I hate it. Been doing it for 13 years and I still hate it because I'm visual. So my suggestion to you guys is if you end up in a department or a place that wants you to do dictations, if you have the ability to proofread it afterwards, proofread it. If it's a high priority type of case that you know for sure you're going to end up in court, if you have the ability to type it up yourself, type it up yourself. Because if you have to change information, our department's really hard to change information in your report to read it the next day because it shoots over real quick to the prosecutor's office. So if there's something you need to correct, it's going to be hard to correct it. So, like I said, you need to, anyways, change thought. I'll just go back to being concise. So, you want to limit repeating certain descriptions. I talked to the guy who does our typing, and he stated that some people like to repeat the same sentence over and over again. Once you've given a description, unless it's important because of different interviews from people, to give that same description, don't give the same description of the person. If you don't have their name, then you just refer to them as suspect 1 or something of that nature. So, and I like the one avoid wordy phrases. These are a couple too I could think of. I asked them to put an end to the party. I asked them to end the party. I asked them to stop the party. I asked them to cease. These would be shorter words than put an end to. Based on the fact that it was 2 o'clock in the morning and he was driving around without his lights on. Because. How about just because? Is that simpler, shorter? So that's another part of being concise. Research. There's still research in report writing, right? When I interview victims, witnesses, I get videotapes from the local gas station. I am doing research. I'm putting information together. I'm fact-checking, right? I'm going to, you telling me that Billy Bob was there and he witnessed the whole thing as well. I got to go interview Billy Bob and find out if he really was there and if he witnessed it. And I actually have to find out if he actually saw it, heard it, or was 3 miles away and was told about it. Right? There's a difference, right? And then evidence. This good example would be when I go to death investigations and I have somebody who's been laying dead in a certain position for a while, their blood pools to that side of their body. So they have this red mark on their body that's consistent with they were laying on that side of their body when they died, and all the blood in your body just pools to that area. That's evidence that that person died in that position, right? So that would make sense with somebody says, I rolled the person over, they were ice cold, and I started CPR. They should have blue marks on their face if they were face down, right? Because that's where the blood's going to pool. I know I have a gruesome job, right? Okay. So why is report writing important? I think I've mentioned a couple things, but just remember, many people are evaluating your work. I don't like looking stupid in front of other people, and I don't know anybody who says, oh yeah, I'm fine with looking stupid. So the bottom line is you don't want to look stupid. And people are evaluating your work. So if you have lots of details missing, if you say one thing but you really meant something else, you know, they're going to evaluate, are you telling the truth? Are you changing your story for the point of trial now? You know, that could be an issue. So your integrity also is being evaluated. If you develop a reputation for good or bad reports, if you have bad reports, what's going to happen is prosecutors are going to be really quick to reduce charges or throw a report out or a case out because your report is horrible. And then you're going to have a hard time explaining an incident to somebody else if you can't write it out. Because part of writing out is, think about it, even if you're writing out just notes before you do the full report, that's going to help you put things in order. It's going to help you organize. It's going to help you get your elements out. Remember fact 1, 2, and 3. I have cases at times that have 5, 6, or 7 charges on it. 3, 4, 5, 10 suspects. I have to organize that. So if I can't write it out in a way that makes sense, it's going to be very hard to explain it to somebody. That makes sense, okay? And I talked about their inconsistencies too. If you're inconsistent when you're telling a story, it's just like, think about, has anybody here watched like court TV where somebody's just inconsistent on the stand? You know, it's like asking questions to somebody, well, am I going to find your fingerprints on that pencil? And you're like, I never touched a pencil, but I don't know. If you never touched a pencil, then your fingerprints aren't going to be on it, right? So that's part of those inconsistencies, and even for interviewing people, okay? So that's gonna look bad on you as a police officer too if you're inconsistent in that same way. I like that top one. If you do a well-written report, you can encourage a defense attorney to settle their case really quickly, because they're going to turn to their client and say, I don't know how to defend you. This person has all their I's dotted, all their T's crossed. I don't know what kind of defense to come up for you. You know, you were driving, you were drunk. What do you want me to do for you? So they might come up with some type of settlement. In my 13 years as a police officer, I've never had to testify in a drunk driving case. And I've had a lot of drunk drivers. I have a lot of details I put in those reports that follow a lot of protocol and training that I've had for drunk driving. Because of that, I don't think defense attorneys want to take it to court. That last one's also very important. If you have a bad report, the officer's going to end up being on trial, not the suspect. Your report will end up being on trial, not the suspect. You ever watch those shows where they make the officer look really, really bad on the stand, or movies where you're like, yeah, I hate him too. Oh, it's okay, because he looks really bad. And you think that they must be evil, they must have done something wrong, they must have tweaked some information just because they look so bad. And so, like I said, if a defense attorney can twist the case and make the police officer look bad, make the prosecutor's case look bad, they're going to divert attention. You know, it's like telling everybody to look this way when all the activity is really going on that way. You know, they're going to go ahead and wow the crowd with the circus act that's going on over here. Okay? There you go. What do we think? Questions? I know we have questions. And I'm open to questions about anything, not just report writing. Give us the opportunity.
Second. We're filming, so I'm gonna.
You up all night? We two people
It's
up all night?
almost like Ricky Lake, right? You don't have to stand up.
How long would it take a police officer to become an FBI?
Being a police officer is not a stepping stone to going into the federal government. So if you want to go into the federal government, you should start your process there. I will tell you this, my experience has been, back in about 2005, 2006, I went to a convention in Chicago because they had a lot of federal jobs that were open. I had about 5 or 6 years in law enforcement. I went there because I was interested in becoming an FBI agent, had been all my life. Nobody guided me in the direction that tells you that being a police officer has no stepping stone, is not a stepping stone at all for the federal government. The federal government, I was told flat out by FBI agents that we don't look for people who are in law enforcement because our pool of people who are in law enforcement is this big. Our pool for people who are civil engineers, teachers, attorneys, CPAs, people who do taxes, lawyers, is smaller. and they like diversity. So they don't want to fill the FBI with a bunch of people who just have law enforcement thinking. They want people who are outside that spectrum. So I'm not saying you shouldn't necessarily go into criminal justice, but if you have another passion, use criminal justice either as a double major or a minor, and start applying to the federal government for positions, because they don't necessarily pick from pools of police officers. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay.
When you do take DNA evidence or some blood evidence, whatever like that, how long does it take for like the lab to do that kind of work?
Okay, if you're watching CSI, it takes 1 hour.
No, I mean in
In
actual life.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I meant.
I always love throwing that out there. Guess, tell me, how long do you think it takes?
Weeks?
6 months to a year.
Oh, wow. That's a long.
And yes, it's very long. And so yes, so it's complete. Well, and imagine if they did that at CSI, everybody would have gray hair by the time 3 cases are done, right? You wouldn't be able to do a season. You'd have to have new characters every season because everybody would be retired. Right? So, yep, that's one of the things that law enforcement has to contend with when we go to trial. Movies and media has made it hard for police officers when they're testifying on the stand, because people are like, why don't you have a fingerprint? Why don't you have DNA evidence? Fingerprints are not that easy to get. I'm not saying that we don't leave fingerprints, but getting a really good fingerprint. I've never had one that's fully rolled. You ever see those? They're fully rolled, the full thumbprint. I've never had one of those. Well, okay, I can't say never. I've had it on that rare occasion, and then I'm like jumping up and down like the complete geek, excited that I got a really good fingerprint. I'm always happy that I have just a partial, okay? And then when I get the lab report back that says, I have a match. Or I'm actually really excited when they say it's of good comparison quality. But the reality is TV has made it so everybody thinks that it's really easy to get evidence and really good evidence, and it's just not. So when we go to court, people are asking, juries will ask questions like, why don't you have DNA evidence? Why don't you have this and that? It's really hard to come up with some of that information. More questions? I heard you talking over here. You have a question?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What's the most difficult part about your job? You've been on the force for nearly 13 years.
Mhm.
What's the most difficult part?
Other than the fact that I've been on midnights for the last 13 years. That has been hard, because eventually, that's just the personal note. I can tell you other things have been hard about the job itself, like kind of calls to go to, but I will tell you that one of the things that most officers will tell you, and the crew I work with, is the midnight shifts. I work 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Over the last couple of years, we finally switched to a 12-hour shift, and you're thinking, finally, what does that mean? Well, we used to work 10-hour shifts, and every 2 months, we would switch from working like a second shift to a third shift, and then you were back to a second shift. And so by the time you got used to a sleeping pattern, we would switch shifts. And so that was really hard. So sleeping becomes an issue like of level of importance. But for me, I have learned and had to come to an acceptance. So anybody who's going to law enforcement or anybody who's ever working a job that's third shift, one of the things you have to come to an acceptance really quick is nobody else works third shifts, just you. Your friends do not. Your family does not. They should not make accommodations for you. They shouldn't, because they're living the normal life. You're the oddball out. They'll have compassion for you, hopefully. But what you do is, on my days off, I want to interact with my family. I get up early. I want to do things that are normal, like come here and speak to you. I got out actually at 6 today. Took a 3-hour nap. And now I'm here. Always, you miss out on a lot of things. So you end up missing out on things if you don't come to that acceptance right away. And then you also come to the acceptance that you are going to miss out on some things. So that's the hardest on that note. When it comes to a law enforcement perspective, like kind of calls are the hardest. Going to death scenes that involve children are the hardest. Or going to people arguing even on the holidays. For some reason, that one's, for me, like you have a family. You're supposed to just care about them. Can we just all get along just on one day? So
questions? Okay, I have another question.
Go for it.
As it relates to writing and being a professional now, 13 years later, are there things that you remember experiencing in your English classes when you were a student that you wish you would have grasped so that you wouldn't have to deal with some of the things that maybe you're dealing with now? Think back 12 years ago, 13 years ago when you first started working and how your college career could have really helped.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I liked writing in school, so that was a benefit for me. But understanding organization, really appreciating the level of organization, is something that I think would be very beneficial. I would say one of my biggest pet peeves is spelling. So if you are not a good speller, so take the time now to learn how to spell those words. So you're learning how to spell them over the course of 4, 5, 6 years versus all of a sudden you're trying to write a report and you can't figure out how to spell anything. I always appreciated that part. So, but grammar, I wish I would have learned to do. I think I'm not perfect. I don't think maybe people who are teaching, who are teachers right here who are maybe close to perfect on grammar, but there's some grammar issues. That I wish I would have asked more questions about. I would have maybe got a better textbook that would have taught me some of that stuff, because when I do a paper, like I said, I just graduated with my master's in public administration. I edit, like, how many times do you think I edited my final paper for my degree? Like 2,000 times, probably. I constantly was editing. And if you can learn that concept of editing and having other people edit and taking other people's criticism of your paper, that will also be beneficial because I learned throughout this whole time that editing is going to be huge. Even with my reports at work, I go back and I think I did a really good job doing my report, and then I read it and I'm like, what does this say? What is going on here? And you have to take in consideration, if you are working third shift and you've had a really busy night and you've had 10 different reports to write, come 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, you're tired. So your brain's not firing properly when you're trying to do these reports. So editing is also going to be really important.
I know there's one more burning question.
It has to be anything.
Just one question?
About law enforcement, about death scenes, about
Writing about death scenes?
As you notice, as a medical examiner, I still have to write reports there too. So I'm writing a report that is directed. My audience there is the forensic pathologist. So this is somebody who's gone to school, I think, at least 14 years beyond medical school. I don't know. They've like gone to school forever. Yeah, it's like something crazy. They've been in school forever. Okay. Talk about somebody who's been in school forever. That's somebody who knows it. So I'm writing reports and I'm nervous because I'm not that far medically trained. I'm still learning some of the terminology, so I keep it simple. If I don't know the medical term, I'm not going to guess. I just describe what it is. Or this internet thing is just really kicking in there. I look things up. I look things up and make sure I'm using the medical term properly. Does a person have gout, or do they have just inflammation of something? Or these are things I need to be able to use properly. What else? There's more questions. What other fields are we in here? I'm going to ask questions. Oh, okay, you want to do canine. Okay. And usually that's a division within a department, and it's like a selection process. So we have a couple canines in our department. So what they do is they've been officers for a couple of years, and then they applied for the position. So I think you have to be pretty detailed as to what your dog does. You do. You have to be extremely detailed because you're going to tell people how you understand what your dog's doing. That if your dog is a passive alert dog, what does that mean? Does that mean they smell drugs here? They sit down there and just look at you with a dumb look? That's their way of alerting you. They have another officer who was new with his dog, and they were doing a track. You guys know what a track is? Guy ran from a scene. Dog picks up the scent. Stick their nose to the ground. That's how the canine knows they're on a track. They stick their nose to the ground and they make this really loud huffing sound. It's amazing. It's just amazing. If you're in a room like this, if the dog's doing that down here, you can hear it back there. It's just crazy. They do the track. They finally get to a point and they're on a boardwalk. The dog just stops and looks at his, what I always say, looks at his dad. He's just looking at him. And again, this canine officer was new with his dog, so you're still learning and learning how to build that trust with your dog. The dog's just looking at him. He's like, come on, dude, where's he at? Does it get him? The dog's just looking at him. Just looking at him, looking at him. Finally, he realizes the guy's underneath them. He jumped off the boardwalk and crawled up into a space underneath the boardwalk. So the dog was saying, he's right here. We are on top of him. He's right here. So you want, yeah. And so that made that officer not only trust his dog more, but he's also going to articulate that in his reports. My dog stopped, looked down, looked up, looked confused. That's what we think, right? The dog's confused. No. He was saying, if I had an index finger, I would point right here. Right?
Is there a waiting list to become a cop in Michigan?
I answer that question. I guess the answer would be no, because when you have to apply to different departments, every department, which is I think is kind of an issue in Michigan. Like you have to apply, if you want to apply for Holland, you have to apply to Holland. If you want to apply to the state police, you have to apply to the state police. If you want to apply for Van Buren County or Ottawa County Sheriff's Department or Allegan County, you have to apply to all those places separately. And they all do their own background checks, and that's all separate. And that's if they have positions open. Right now, hiring is much slower than it was when I first started. When I first started, within the first 2 years, I had almost 20 people underneath me because Holland went through this huge hiring process, and we were able to replace people who retired. Finally now, we've been short for a while now. We've finally opened up to hiring 2 people to get us back up to a certain level of officers. So is there a waiting list? I would say that there's more of it's more stagnant. The whole hiring process has kind of come to a halt. There's not as many people who are hiring. Although I will tell you that if you get your education here in Michigan or go to an academy here in Michigan, we train far beyond what most other states do. This is a good thing for you. If you decide to get your certification here, yeah, you pay for an academy here, but I'm telling you that education that you get here, I'm always a big proponent of this because the education I received in my academy training here and that you will receive in Michigan, whether it be GRCC or Grand Valley, is going to take you far beyond trainings in most other states. Most other states accept our certifications and actually will put you through a cert course, a shorter cert course for their state. When I was at Grand Valley, different states would send emails to our academy saying, if people are looking to move out of state, we're looking to hire from your academy. So just keep that in mind if you want a really, really good education and maybe most of the training that you'll ever have. Our academies are good for that. Hang on. Right there, and then I'll come to you.
How hard was the police academy?
It definitely put you to task. I went to Grand Valley's Academy, and Grand Valley's Academy was, you graduated in April, and then within a week you started at the academy, and then you were from, usually I think it was like the end of April, beginning of May, right to the end of August. So it's a good 3-month program. They always did more hours than what the state required you to do. At that time, Grand Valley's Academy was a little bit more militant, so they did the screaming at you tactic, and you stood there and you took it. So not a lot of academies do that a whole lot anymore, although I think it's more realistic if you get yelled at a little bit because, I'm not saying it's nice, but unfortunately, people scream at you all the time. And so you need to be able to just be like, okay, it's not personal. They're screaming at me because they're screaming, either because they're sad, angry, arrogant, whatever the reason, they're screaming at you. And you need to not take it personal or scream back. Very physically demanding. And then also academically demanding. We'd have sometimes 16-hour days and still have homework when you go home. And then you were constantly taking tests. You have a certain amount of hours you have to have, and even here at GRCC's academy, there's state requirements. You have to have a certain amount of hours of driver's training, certain amount in evidence, certain amount in criminal investigation, certain amount, so you have to have all specific amounts of hours to get your MCOLS certification or certifiability. I don't know if you know that once you're through the academy, you're certifiable. It's not till you get hired that you're certified. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just wanted to know, going back to the canine, I was just wondering where you guys train the canines. Is it by military or is it by police force itself?
These dogs are shipped in from out of country. They're usually in from from the Czechoslovakia or from like Germany. I don't know 100% where all these dogs come from, but their commands are all in a different language. And they're usually like a German Shepherd or a Malinois. And they are trained, which makes sense, they're trained in a different language, because if I'm the canine handler and I'm yelling, stop, 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 or you're the suspect yelling, stop, 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 the dog cannot understand the difference, versus if I'm yelling something in German, very guttural, stop. I mean, stop, right? The dogs understand that's his command for stop, right? Versus just the English stop. So I know they're trained out of the country. They're shipped in. They're purchased. These dogs are anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. And that's not including all the time and money that goes into investing and training the officer, because then the officer has to go to a month training with the dog to then bond with the dog and get trained with the dog and see if it's a good match. And one of our current canine officers who's new is now going off. He's out of state to get certified and to take a bunch of tests. He has to take tests to pass to show. So when you go to court, you can say, look, my dog can properly do a track. My dog can properly do a drug search. And then they're constantly keeping documentation as to how many times and their percentage of successes and quality of success and all that, because those records go into court.
Thank you.
And I think there was a question right here.
Does like tattoos or any of that affect like criminal justice?
Oh, good question.
That's a great question, and the answer is yes. If you want anything visible, your chances of getting hired in somewhere are very little, especially in the state of Michigan. I don't know for other states, but if you get sleeves, when you're wearing short sleeves at work, your sleeve tattoos aren't gonna cut it. So you might not get hired because of that. Our policy right now at our department is, if they hired you in with certain tattoos, that's it. If I were to decide to go and get a forearm tattoo, I could lose my job. I'd be in violation of that policy. So it would be a problem, especially if you get something on your neck, on your face, anything like that, knuckles, you're gonna have issues. So remember, it's permanent and can be removed, but I heard it's really painful to have them removed. So really reconsider that. If you get these armbands, make sure they're up enough that if you're wearing a short sleeve shirt that it does not show, or don't get anything on your calf, because if you get assigned to bike patrol, you don't want a picture of a naked lady on your calf, right?
I have a question. Wanted to know, do you have information about potential officers being hired with disabilities?
It depends on the disability. I know Michigan has some strict rules as to you can't be colorblind. You have to be able to run, jump, walk, move quickly. Part of that is safety, because you are carrying a gun around, and if you can't move in a manner in which that helps you protect yourself, but also your gun, but also protecting someone else. If I can't protect you because I can't move around, so I don't know. It depends on position. I mean, if it's an office position that doesn't require certain activities, then I know that you probably could get hired. There are positions for that. There's also, if you have hearing disabilities, if your hearing can be corrected with hearing aids, just like vision, if it can be corrected with glasses or laser surgery or glasses or contacts, whatnot, if you can get it to a certain level of vision, then you can still be a police officer. On the laser surgery, note, be careful on that, just in case you're going to the federal government, because sometimes they won't accept people who have had LASIK. Small, weird things that you learn throughout the years.
Do you know why exactly the dogs are shipped in from a different country?
You know, I can't tell you 100% why. All I do know is historically, those are the countries that have trained dogs for that. So I don't know if that's just their specialty. And I know they take them from a young pup, and I don't know what they do to these dogs to train them to be so obedient. I honestly have no clue. But some of these dogs are really passive obedient, and some are really aggressive obedient. So, and sometimes you get a bad apple with some of these dogs. We've had to return dogs that were just too aggressive for us.
If you had military trained, you still have to go to police academy?
Yes, but on some departments, the military training is looked highly upon, or it gives you certain points, higher points in scoring. For like a lot of departments hire it based on a point system. You get points for if you speak a different language. You get points for if you're in the military. You still have to go through the academy because the military does not teach you Michigan law. It does not. It'll enhance your success. It should enhance your success through an academy, but it doesn't teach you Michigan law as well as law enforcement tactics. The military teaches you military tactics. And let's be honest, military tactics are not law enforcement tactics. You don't want to see some of the things that we have to do in other countries when we're at war going on in your backyard, right? Let's be honest, right? So it's going to teach you completely different tactics and different train of thought. I mean, we have a couple military guys, and it was always funny when they first started working for us because they were very, yes, sir, no, sir, and very stiff, and that's how they spoke with people, and it didn't work out really well. We had to tell them to stop being so stiff. People are people, and you follow rules, but also in law enforcement, one of the things is I know in the military a lot of times if you disobey a rule, you're in a lot of trouble, but in law enforcement, if you disobey a rule because you think it's ethically wrong and you don't follow a sergeant's order because it's ethically wrong or they're misdirecting you, you cannot use the excuse that he told me to shoot him and I shot him when I actually didn't think there was any reason for me to use that level of force because the sergeant just told me. You can't use that excuse. You are responsible for all of your actions, and if you use that excuse, you will be criminally charged for excessive use of force or for murder.
My dad was a Kane County Sheriff police officer for 32 years, and I was wondering what made you want to be going to law enforcement? Because he hated seeing people, be done wrong or whatever, so I just wanted to know what made you want to do it.
I wanted to be a police officer since I was 12, so it's kind of an all my life kind of thing. It's two fields. I was either going to go the medical route because I wanted to help people, or I wanted to go in law enforcement route. And for whatever reason, I was pulled towards the law enforcement route. I decided that I really like the idea of helping people. I think also, and it's fair to say that for most people who are young and thinking about going to law enforcement, they're interested in the excitement and the variety of day-to-day shifts. Is this fair to say? Although I will help curb that that myth. It's not always exciting. Sometimes it's 90% boredom and 5% terror and another 5% of recovery from that terror. And because yes, you still get frightened and you still get startled and you're still like, oh boy, my gosh, that was a crazy situation. And the difference is that we take that oath to actually go into those situations even when they are like, oh my gosh. So this is something I always wanted to do.
Are there any more questions? Not? Officer Joanna, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Thank you for your time.
No, let's give her a great, great GRCC thank you. If you had a burning question and you were not brave enough to take on the microphone, please come and thank her for coming, spending time with us today. Thank you very much for being here for our Who Care, Why Bother? And so say hello to her, thank her, and I'll take your evaluation sheets. Thank you very much.